Hi, this is Paul. The response from yesterday's video was more than I expected. As I said in the video, I was rather nervous to do it because I think there's something sort of asymmetrical and unfair about responding to a comment like that because, I mean, in this case, he hasn't responded in the comments yet, so he might have just simply moved on from the channel. And churn is a very big part of YouTube. People, myself included, you watch a channel for a while and then you lose interest or something else grabs your interest, so you move on. And I think it's in that it's part of that reality why a YouTube fan base or following is never really a church. Churches are much stickier. You have much more skin in the game in a church, and we're going to be talking more about church in this video. One of the things that's surprised me since I started this YouTube channel is just how profitable the comment section has been for me. Right from the start, many of you have left really helpful and, again, often critical comments that have taught me a lot. And again, none of this is new. Read the book of Proverbs. The book of Proverbs will tell you right away that, you will learn more from your critics than you will from your friends. Because they're just working on different things. And so I do read the comments and I do enjoy critical comments. And of course, not all critical comments are of equal value. Some critiques are, in fact, some of the most important, helpful ones can be devastating. But again, this is all in service of knowing the truth. So there was another comment that I thought, and of course, some of you said, Paul's never read any of my comments. Well, maybe I will. You never know. And some of you, write really good comments. Well, this one from Michael Vitalis, hope I'm saying your name correctly, just wanted to follow up on a question that I had a while back. Not sure if you made a video about it or if I missed it. No, I haven't made a video about this, but this question has been asked of me a number of times, and in fact, I had some email back and forth with Father Stephen DeYoung via Jonathan Pageau. Jonathan Pageau brought us together, and we talked about doing a joint conversation, and it never happened. This is for me not this isn't the Daily Wire with Ben Shapiro where he has secretaries and organizers and all of that. This is just me sort of running a side gig here to my day job and what I do. So, things get lost and it's a mess, and yeah, I should clean my room. If you haven't watched the Bridges of Meaning news, the latest episode, he comes in to his apartment. I got to clean my room, and he sits down on his sofa and watches a video where Jordan Peterson says, clean his room, and he sits there and watches, and that's human. So no, I've never done a video on this, but it's a good question, and I get it asked fairly regularly. So yeah, it's a good thing to make a video on. The question was, with all that you've learned about Eastern Orthodox Church from Jordan Peterson and Jonathan Pageau, I think from Jonathan Pageau, I don't think I've really learned much about Eastern Orthodoxy from Jordan Peterson. Why are you still Protestant? It's a fair question. And Stephen DeYoung used to be Christian Reformed, and now he's Orthodox. Another father in Dallas attended a Christian Reformed church. I don't know if he was ever a member of it. Attended a Christian Reformed church of Len Vandezee, who's been on my channel and is now an Orthodox priest. And so this is not an unusual path. And Orthodoxy has, of course, been gaining momentum in the United States. It's still quite small, but bit by bit. It's difficult for people to realize just how huge the world is and how huge churches are. And because, just a tiny sliver of them operate in this YouTube world that we do. I mean, I would imagine by far the biggest YouTuber in the Christian Reformed Church, but, probably just a few thousand people in the Christian Reformed Church, which is, at least in official membership, around 200,000, probably 250,000 if you include some recent ex-CRC people. And just a sliver of them know about this channel and know me. This is a very small operation. The world is very big, and even someone like Jordan Peterson, who's got, he's creeping up on 4 million subscribers and has a best-selling book and all of that. Just grab anyone in the street and say Jordan Peterson, and odds are they won't know his name. And so the world is just that way. And these structures and platforms are a very big deal, as I talked about a bit in the Michael Malice video, in terms of mass media. I mean, everybody knows Joe Biden or Donald Trump's name, or almost everybody, but there's a lot of people who might be huge in your world that nobody knows their name. So, question is, why am I still a Protestant? It's not meant to be a demeaning question. I certainly don't take it that way. It's simply asking for your insights, and that's what I'm going to give. I left a Protestant version of Christianity to pursue Orthodox recently, and this individual is not alone. There's a bunch of them in the Bridges of Meaning Discord server, a bunch of randos that I've talked to, some of them in my own local meetup. This has been a function of the Jordan Peterson wave, and Jonathan Pageau has been, an evangelist for the Orthodox Church, a very effective one, and I celebrate that. And I'll get into why a little bit later. Another line of thinking that I couldn't get around was Protestants claim to believe in the historical Jesus Christ. Protestants claim to believe in historical accounts of the New Testament. But Protestants refuse to join historical church established by the historical Christ, who through the lives of the saints wrote the historical events of the New Testament. Now, the Roman Catholic Church might argue that you're in the wrong church because, of course, who sits on Peter's throne at the Vatican? So, and what exactly do you mean by historical? Because though that word is not anywhere near as self-evident as you might imagine, in many ways, the way you're using that word historical is a modern way of using the word. An ancient wouldn't have used that word. In many respects, history, as we know it, is an invention of the modern. It's now Herodotus might have been the inventor of history, at least ancient history, but modern history and ancient history are very different things. And so while I understand your point, we're going to have to talk a little bit about that, because Protestants would themselves say, no, we are attempting to embody uncorrupted New Testament church. Well, is that church known via apostolic succession and the lineage of a structure and an institution? Or is that church known by an embodiment of the Holy Spirit here and now? In many ways, that's really the question between them. And so we'll get there towards the end of the video. So if you want more on that, stay tuned. YouTube analytics shows me just what percentage of you drop out the first 5 seconds of the video. I think people click on it, see my face, and this is not what I was counting on. On to the next video. Anyway, here we are. History, his story. Yeah, well, in English. None of the writers of the New Testament were Protestant. Were they Orthodox? Were they Roman Catholic? And part of the reason I'm doing this now is I'm preaching through the Apostle Paul. And so we have, Paul as presented to us by Luke in the book of Acts, and Paul as presented to us by himself, but not presented to us in many of his epistles. And if you want to talk about history, there's a fierce fight about the historicity of all of those things. And again, I'm just responding to a video that said I was too materialistic and too literal. So, and even just mentioning those distinctions would say I'm not literal enough, because basically what many Protestants say, especially Pentecostals, would say that right now in our church, by receiving the gift of tongues, we are embodying directly the work of the Holy Spirit. And therefore, all that other stuff is corruption of it, and we're drinking from the genuine well. And in some ways, Colt Redwine's comment was a sort of version of that. And that line has pretty much been around right from the start as well. And so as a Protestant, I would recommend a close reading of the New Testament. And orthodoxy isn't really a word you're going to find in there. You're not going to find metropolitans and primates and Pontus and many of those things in the New Testament. You will find Peter, and you will find Paul, and you will find other early church leaders. But are we to sort of take them and slap them onto Orthodox? Similar questions abound with something like the state of Israel. Is the modern state of Israel the heir of the ancient kingdom of Israel? What exactly are these structures, and how are we to regard them, and how are we to personally engage with them and join them in membership? And this body of Christ, is it contained only within, let's say, the one true church, whichever that one true church it may be? I mean, I pretty much imagine the Westboro Baptist Church imagines themselves to be the last remnants of the church itself. And I could find many Christian Reformed people who believed such things, and on and on and on. And usually the church that we just split from, well, we are the one true church, and they are, well, you can find passages in 1 John to read on to them. So this is what we're talking about, and this is what we're dealing with. And these issues I'm very much aware of, and so I'm going to sort of walk through a certain line of argumentation in this video, and I hope you find it helpful, at least to explain a little bit of my thinking and why I remain in the Christian Reformed Church, and how I feel a little bit. I'll talk a little bit about how I feel about what I've seen from Orthodoxy and the Roman Catholic Church. And yeah, hopefully this video will answer your question. Shouldn't the interpretation of the writers, Orthodoxy, then carry more weight than the interpretation of the readers, Protestant? Ooh, that's clever. But again, if you look at my sermon that I just preached on Sunday, the rough draft is here, but I thought the final draft went better, and I should isolate that from the rest of the service. But you can find the whole service and y'all know how to use YouTube. Just skip all the singing part and just go right to the sermon if you want to. The Apostle Paul, N.T. Wright makes this case, and I think he's correct, really considered himself embodying the true line of Israel. And at least as Luke has recorded them, the Ananias and many of the New Testament people believe that Jesus was the fulfillment and culmination of the story of Israel. And then that went out, and finally, through the church, was able to embrace the Gentiles in a way that Paul and other New Testament Christians believed was the faithful continuation of the story of Israel. Now, obviously, many who are in what we today call Judaism disagree. And, there's one particular colorful individual on our local Bridges of Meaning Discord server that is very articulate, and he's fun to talk to and argue about this with. And I've learned a ton from him, and so I love these questions, and I think these questions are worth exploring. So we'll take a look at some of them now. I found that for me, after learning just a little bit of the light, to remain Protestant was to be disingenuous. And I hope nothing in this video turns you from that, because in many ways I am sort of convinced of C.S. Lewis's position of mere Christianity. And off this hallway, which is mere Christianity, there are many rooms. And you don't want to live in the hallway. You want to live in a room. And so if you found new life in Christ in an Orthodox church, I'm not going to do a darn thing to try and argue you out of it. And if you found you are a better apostle and disciple of Jesus Christ in that Orthodox church than you were in your former Protestant church, even I as a Protestant will celebrate that transition. And this isn't just something I do for randos on YouTube that I don't have skin in the game, but this is something as a local church pastor I deal with all the time. People leave this church and go to other churches, sometimes for good reasons, sometimes for less than good reasons, but they do it. And I just pray that they go to a church. Now, how then we construct what a true church is, evangelicalism for a while talked about a Bible-believing church. That's very much nested in a historical context. In the Christian Reformed Church, we welcome people to make profession of faith if they've been baptized in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, a Trinitarian church. Of course, we've got our friend Sam on the Discord server, who is he calls himself a biblical Unitarian. And so discussions about the Trinity go on, and Sam is a fearsome debater, and he knows a ton about the ancient church. And so, for you Orthodox folks who are real masters of church fathers and some of that, well, you'll find a rival in Sam who is doing who's doing a series on church fathers with our friend Hank on Sam's channel. And Hank just left the Protestant church and has gone Roman Catholic and continues to troll me on Twitter and in the comment section about trying to get me to go Roman Catholic. And, I talk to Hank semi-regularly. He calls me and we chat on the phone, and I always have great fun. And he and Sam are sort of part of the core of the Chicago meetup. And hopefully one of these days I'm going to get out to Chicago and get to meet with them up in person and really enjoy that. And so, I love Sam and I love Hank, and this is how I am. And so, well, let's jump into it. I'd like to understand your view on the matter. Thank you. That's a great question. So let's talk about God and people first. God is free. And one of the benefits of being a Calvinist is God picks and chooses. And sometimes from the human side of things, that feels scary and arbitrary and nerve-wracking. But from another point of view, God is not dependent on our systems. And God is not dependent on our fickleness. And God is not restrained by all kinds of things. God is free, and God does what he wants. You can find a psalm that says exactly that. He picks and chooses, and sometimes he binds himself to his own self, because there's nothing larger that can bind him. And so he is not arbitrary, but he is free. And to figure out why that is and how that is difficult. And, when I get to talking about, the problem of evil, that freedom of God's is something that I rest pretty heavily on. And it is awesome and terrifying, but in a context of trust. I see it as analogous to a child doesn't know what the parent is doing, but the child trusts the good parent. And even though the good parent does things like bring them to doctors who put vaccines in them and, do things to their bodies that feel very wrong, the child learns to trust the good parent because the good parent knows more. So God is free, and God picks people, and God chooses people. Human beings, we're small and fallen. We get things wrong, and we can't see the whole deal. So God does seek out individuals, and he treats us individually. But God also uses people through structures, communities, families, etc. And, we see this in God picking God's call to Abraham. God's call to Abram, his renaming of Abram to Abraham. And, go to a land I won't show you, and I'll make you into a great nation. You'll be the father of nations. And Abraham responded in faith, sort of. If you read the Abraham cycle, he hadn't, he responded to go, but did he really trust God too much with all of it? Because it seems that every turn Abraham is trying to bless himself. And we'll find that same story in Isaac, that Jacob keeps trying to bless himself. And so this mixture of God's free calling us and election and the need for us to respond in faith, but our agency is very contingent on so many other things, including structures and stories and families and all of that. But this capacity of ours to build structures and to build relationships and to build relationships of trust and to network with each other. This is, in many ways, our superpower that no other creature that we know of has like us. And, we can find insects that work communally and collaboratively, but not like us, not with our flexibility, not with our capacity for transformation, not for our capacity to develop relationships with one another that are enduring and nuanced and complex and breakable yet repairable. And, that's us. Now, the church is a product of this work, and part of the package of Protestantism is this idea of the invisible church. And there's some issues with that, certainly. Because on one hand, the only real churches are not invisible at all because they're instantiated and incarnated. And so this Protestant fiction, as it were, of the invisible church is a useful fiction and a helpful fiction, and I think a true fiction, but always in some ways a fiction, because every real church is a church of real people. Not all of those people living. In fact, many of them are dead, but as Jesus said, as Jesus noted, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are very much alive to God in a way that they are not alive and accessible to us. And the same is true of the church. And so in that sense, I can't lay hands on Aquinas or Origen or Maximus the Confessor or John Calvin or Martin Luther or my grandfather or my father in the way that I can touch the people in my church here, but I believe they are still part of God's church. So visible or not visible. So God chose and used and continues to use Israel to reach the whole world. I think that's the story of the Bible. It's a story of election. God chooses Abraham. God chooses Israel. Christ is the anointed one. He's the elect one, and God chooses us. Now, again, I've show a lot of resistance to getting caught in the quagmire. There are often sort of mushy, swampy quagmires around an estuary, and I would rather sort of swim in the water in between than labor in the muck. But there are muck laborers, and fair enough. There are often clams in that muck, and sometimes there are pearls in those clams. So, hey, go right to it. But I like to swim with the fishes. God chose apostles. God chose disciples. And where I am in the book of Acts right now, you have these apostles that Jesus chooses, but then very quickly in the book of Acts, we find characters like Stephen and Philip, and they're very much acting like apostles. And there's tons of nuance, even in the story of Philip and Caesarea and Simon Magus and the Ethiopian eunuch about, there's apostles and there's these deacons and there's a laying on of hands, and there certainly seems to be something true about apostolic succession. But at the same time, all of these, and believe me, Pentecostals have scoured that book of Acts to, in some ways, find the formula for exactly how God works through these things and the sure sign of the gift of tongues. And as you might have caught from some of my sermons, a little skeptical about this very rationalistic, modernistic project of mining the Bible in that way. And so, Colt Redwine had some questions about my materiality and my literalism, but I've got a degree of, as all Protestants do, of appreciation for the freedom of God to move with his Spirit as he chooses, often in ways that stretch and grow the church in ways that the church does not expect. Now, in certain contexts, if you hear me saying this, you might say, well, gay marriage and women's ordination, yada, yada, yada. Just hold your horses on some of these things, okay? And because what tends to happen in the church is that a whole lot of things get tried, but not everything endures. And sort of a nod to Jordan Peterson's Darwinian truth, the endurance of things counts for something. It isn't everything, because in a sense, God in heaven is everything and decides everything, but endurance means something. And for that reason, I don't by any means dismiss, and I very much do respect the Roman Catholic Church and the Orthodox Church and many of these churches and traditions that have long endured. There's something to be said about that. But we'll get to the dual-track nature of this in a little bit. Anyway, God continues choosing Cornelius and then Paul. And again, I'm going to be spending some time looking at the Apostle Paul. He's a very complex man. He's a very interesting case, because we might have expected that the New Testament would be mostly written by Peter and John, and certainly they make their contributions, but Paul's contribution is large, and there's a lot going on there. And so, via orthodoxy, all due respect to the church fathers and everything that flowed in that part of the world, it's not the only part of the world that things flowed in. God's Spirit always seems to go out ahead and do different things. So these groups continually seem struggling with and wrestling with God and with each other. Close reading of the New Testament reveals conflict has been a part of the church right from the start. Conflict with, differentiation happened between Pharisaic Judaism, that, I'm using that word anachronistically, but the tradition of the Pharisees versus the tradition of what would become the church. There's some big differences between those groups. Differences in terms of what we moderns call historicity, of what happened and didn't happen. Did Jesus rise from the dead or not? But also differences in terms of teaching, and also similarities. And so this is a deep, complex thing. And for that reason, when we talk about the church, not all of it is visible and accessible to us, partly because we are creatures of time and space living in this dispensation, in this planet, in flesh and blood. And I, as a believer, believe that after my life and work on this world is done, I will likely have more work to do, and I will have access to different things, and the work may be different. But for here and now, a good amount of the church is invisible, at least especially to me. But structure we must. That's our superpower. That's what we do. And again, to give Colt Redwine his due, the Apostle Paul, just read the text carefully. And this is a man of visions. He has visions. He has ecstatic visions. He believes he is receiving directly from the Lord what should happen. And, the movement that follows him, follows him in this. You have Ananias, who to the church at Antioch, gave a prophecy about a famine that would hit the land. Now, again, part of the difference between the Protestants and at least the apostolic succession line of spirit, and I'll talk about that a little bit later because we've been talking a lot about what we mean by this word spirit. The Apostle Paul was both someone of direct experience, direct union with Christ. I liked Anselman's nuance that he brought in the comment section to the previous comment. Yet Paul also was a man of structure and organization. And so as he would found churches in different places, he would appoint leaders. Hey, another point for apostolic succession. We can maybe make a little scoreboard between them. But if you look at what Paul teaches, those people had better walk in the Spirit. And there's Ananias and Sapphira, and there's, and now I'm, rubbing against some of, my Calvinism, perseverance of the saints. In my tradition, we don't say things like once saved, always saved, although you could, take a look at something like that. I much prefer the Dutch Calvinist CRC articulation of it, perseverance of the saints. The saints because they persevere. A lot of other indications of speculation of ongoing participation beyond this world, hard to tell from this side often. And like I said before, we're fallen, we're small, we don't think straight, we don't see right, we get a lot wrong. But individuals and the community and the communal grow together. Individuals energize communities. Without individuals, nothing changes. Without institutions, nothing lasts. But yet institutions live and die. I pastor in a dying congregation. My own little Protestant denomination might not see 2030, might not see 2025. It will probably be different by 2025. Will it be smaller? In the 1990s, Christian Reformed Home Missions was hoping for 400,000 by 2000, and, we're in such decline that, 2,000, it's in decline. Why don't I jump ship? I don't know. We don't value people who jump ships just because it's sinking. Now, there's a time to get off, but sometimes sinking ships can be saved. In fact, I would say the Church of Jesus Christ is always both sinking and being saved at the same time, which is part of this strangeness of the church that, as Jesus said to Paul, my grace is made perfect in weakness. And so it could very well be that in some of the weakness of my own denomination, some of God's grace will be most clearly seen. So individuals energize communities, and communities enable individuals and form them. And I've been formed by my denomination, the Christian Reformed Church of North America. This is how the body is built up. So structure we must. And sometimes we leave ruins in national parks for Americans to visit. There's, as you'll notice from a lot of the pictures in this are from past vacations. I'm a lover of national parks, especially out here in the West. They are amazing and glorious, but as the population of the West continues to increase, especially this summer, quite overrun. And so now I have to try to see these parks in times other than summer, which is pretty tough because a lot of them are at elevation. Churches help us value the quadrants. I introduced the quadrant in my last video. The Bible is the story of the union of heaven and earth, the reconciliation of heaven and earth. And the Bible is also, in many ways, the story of the reconciliation of the individual and the communal. Jesus prays that his followers would be one. And so churches are actually the place where we work on this stuff. And so, again, by my Calvinism, I'm not saying God doesn't call people from outside the church. What I'm saying is that the church is in many ways, language here, you got to be careful. God works through his church for the sake of the world, and it is the epicenter of his work, I believe. Now, that's going to get complicated when it comes to the Bible and people who are outside the church and how to regard them. But, when I'm with Pageau, with, people are coming, go to a church. And then they say, I went to a church and it was a mess. I say, yeah. I can't find a church. And I say, yeah. And maybe I'll have to be outside the church for a while. I'll say, well, maybe. I'm not in charge of you. You're in charge of you. You're responsible when, to a certain degree, some of you listening to me, if I lead you astray, God will say, God will hold me accountable for what I say. So I've got to be careful. Apostle Paul talks about those who teach, or was it James? So, there's stuff going on here, but the church isn't going away. It's just far too useful to go away. So now, in terms of the individual and communal, I see a lot of people doing things individually, and without institutions, nothing's going to last. So, sort of on the religion that's not a religion side of this little corner of the internet, it's terribly difficult to build something that actually transforms the world if it doesn't last longer than one human lifetime. Without individuals, nothing changes. Without institutions, nothing lasts. You have to build institutions because we, in many ways, transcend ourselves by institutions. And we know this by part of what we call them. We call them corporations. And so you can be a really awesome teacher. But if you don't institutionalize to any degree or not, and again, when I saw Jordan Peterson's rise, I didn't see much institutionalization. And so I said, opportunity. Structures, relationships, institutions are continually in a process of decay, reformation, and renewal. They are. That's true of churches, individual, local worshiping communities, and these broader things like what we call the Orthodox Church or the family of Orthodox churches or the Roman Catholic Church, which has a particular structure and a particular tradition. Structures themselves need to account for these processes, and they do. I just had on Twitter a little conversation about monasticism. And in many ways, part of what happens in the Protestant Reformation is a Protestant perspective on the family sort of replaces monasticism in Protestantism, but yet monasticism, which at the time of the Protestant Reformation all would agree was in need of renewal, on one hand, during the time of the Reformation, there was tremendous renewal in the life of the monastic tradition in the Roman Catholic Church. And many, many more orders were established there. And so are there broad sort of invisible structures like evangelicalism under which churches are? That's sort of the Protestant way. But in the Roman Catholic Church, there's a broad structure, but there's these orders and there's secular clergy. And I mean, it's an enormous thing, and it's a tremendously impressive thing. But of course, if you want to pick a fight with Protestants as Orthodox, you're going to have to take on the Roman Catholics too, because they're going to say, hey, wait a minute, we've got someone sitting on this in the See of Peter. So, yeah. And I look at this and I think, I call the Orthodox brothers, I call the Roman Catholics brothers, I call fellow Protestants brothers. I'm going to work with y'all. And if by virtue of my videos, some people start going to an Orthodox or a Roman Catholic or a Protestant church, I'll say, praise God. What can I do to help? Can't do everything. Structures themselves need to account for these processes. The Orthodox aren't quite as monolithic as the Roman Catholic. I've noticed that. There's all these different Orthodox churches. And when they're sort of broken down, well, what are they broken down by? Greek Orthodox, is that language? Or are they in some ways an expression of an ethne? Protestant churches, so the Anglicans are a really, vibrant group right now, sort of in this neo-sacramental movement. Because they're, they took, a lot of, in that peculiar, difficult history of the Anglican Church, they incorporated a lot of things. But then again, Anglicans are sort of all over the map too, and there's the Episcopal Church, and now there's the Anglican Church of North America, who broke with the Episcopalians, and so, there's fractures of Anglicans. But I've got a lot of respect for the Anglicans, and I look at some of their ability to merge things, and I say, but it's also rather English-based, just because it's tied to England. But my Dutch Calvinism, but at least we're small enough that when I talk about Dutch Calvinism, we're hardly in danger of ruling the world, I'll say it that way. But yet it is also an ethne that we are part of. Is that the best way to structure churches or the church? Of course, the Roman Catholics have this enormous structure. There's a power to that. There are liabilities to that. And there are tremendous struggles within it, which I read on Twitter and talk about with my Roman Catholic friends. The traditional Latin Mass, the Tridentine reforms, Protestants started modulating confessions with structures. And, we might be getting to the end of that because of a lot of the philosophical stuff going on underneath as we try to understand what we mean by that. But these are long, long processes. And we're such short people in the age of decay. Here's a picture taken. On an Easter Sunday morning. Oh, let me look at who's in the room. Greg the schizophrenic is standing in back. Sheila came with her daughter and grandchildren. She usually only comes around Easter. I see a couple of my kids, judging from her age and his age. Let me do a little quick math. This is probably around 2010. I look at Jack. I look at Neil. I look at HJ. I look at John. I look at, there's, wow. Dee is looking young and happy. Marty's grandson was driving her to church because she fainted, and so had her license suspended for a year. Lily's in fine form. HJ and John are handing out, being greeters. Nick is visiting his parents. Goes so soon. good number of people in this picture are now part of the invisible church. They're saints in glory. What are they doing now? What is God doing through them now? I don't know. We're not told. I trust him. So everything we build decays. God's Spirit seems to keep moving things on us, testing us, trying us, etc. The book of Acts is like that. The fight over circumcision and dietary rules and meat sacrifice to idols and, how to think about Christ. Was Jesus of Nazareth human? Was he God? What do we mean by God? The story, well, then there's persecution and priests who buckle under during persecution. Are they out, or can they be let in? Under what circumstances? Ministers who have affairs, are they out? Can they be let back in under what circumstances? The church, we're always dealing with all of these things, and the age of decay, things decay, things corrupt. Greg standing in the back, last I knew, he's in a nursing home in Stockton. I wonder if they're giving him schizophrenic medication. Could be kind of a scary guy. He never picked on me. He's about probably 50 pounds lighter and 6 inches shorter, but I sometimes watched him in other situations that didn't look safe. But with a lot of these guys, a direct confrontation, the only way they've managed to stay out of jail is they run instead of try to fight back, because fighting only lands them in jail. It's sort of a Darwinian criminal justice mental illness system we have here in California. But we each stand before God responsible for what we do with our time. Here's Fragile Arch and Arches National Park in Utah, and this is my youngest son. The other kids were all working that summer, and myself and my wife and him, we had our own vacation, just the three of us. And he got annoyed at his parents sometimes and didn't always want all of the direct attention he got from us, but each of us is responsible to do with our time and our gifts and the opportunities that God gives to us. What do we do? Who do we partnership? What do we build? What do we try to reform? What do we try to mend? What do we do with what we've received? I've received the riches of Dutch Calvinism, Kuyper, Bavinck, Waltersdorf, Mao, Plantinga, Calvin College, Christian Reformed Church, Hiram Vanderclay, Stan Vanderclay, Grace Vanderclay, Glenda Welmers. Those who are part of a church I can't see right now. They were part of very visible churches not too long ago. What do we leave for those who follow? I do believe I will stand before his throne of grace, and I will be called to account for what I have and haven't done with this life. And that's part of the reason I do this YouTube channel, because, well, there's a lot of reasons why a minister shouldn't talk so unfiltered on this crazy contraption of YouTube. But I'm glad I have, and I'm glad I did, and I'll keep going as long as I think it's of service to God and his kingdom, and even my church. The church is an astoundingly useful to us in this process. It's the mother of our faith. It gives us a people to give us identity and shape us. It gives us a community to serve God with. It's far more powerful. This is our superpower as human beings, is to cooperate with each other and to do things together. When we do things together, even the Tower of Babel, when they work together, what can't they do? It gives us a place to struggle and support. It gives us people to commit to, and people to offend, and people to make up with. And And all of the stuff, so much of the stuff that we have to grow in, we can't do without other people. And you know, again, you've got the churn on a YouTube channel. There's 10 or 15 times as many of you who have visited this channel and watched more than 2 videos than continue to watch today. That's churn. Church is a lot stickier, You go to a church for a year or 2 or 5 or 10 or 20 or 50 years, and it gets into you. And you have relationships with people. And you have hurts. And you have reconciliations. And you work through that stuff. And all of that stuff goes into making you to be the kind of saint he wants you to become. So, the church isn't going anywhere. I believe that. Well, the video that I've been trying to make for the last 2 or 3 days and utterly failed, I can't even make a PowerPoint, has to do with the church because, so yesterday, again, my colleagues, he and I are sitting in the sanctuary, and he says, when the churches like this are dying. That whole age of the church, this tiny little thing, this little Christian reformdom that had a long tradition of the successive generations and all of their adaptation, that thing is dying. And new things are coming to life, but the new things are not yet birthed. And so he and I, in some ways try to preserve what we can of the old and carry forward the best things. And we'll get things wrong. But it's all filtered through the whole group of people. And try to birth new things into the world. Now, a tradition like the Orthodox are really strong maintainers. But you don't find domes in the New Testament. You don't. And to what degree is that dome with Jesus on top an integral part of what it means to be Orthodox? I'm not saying that it is or it isn't. I'm just saying these are hard questions. And so, I think about my first conversation with Jonathan Pageau. I had 2,000 subscribers. He maybe had 4. Now he's got 120,000. I still have 18. But, he wrestled with icon carving. And he's a traditionalist in that sense. But it's easy to sort of dismiss the progressives and the modernists. But, there are real reasons why they try to adapt, and maybe they adapt too much, and maybe the thread is lost with them. That's always happening. It's happening in Protestant churches. To a certain degree, with Protestantism, dead wood can be more easily sloughed off because Protestants are such quitters. But that's also part of the weakness of Protestantism, that people abandon. They're not faithful. So this is part of the process. And the church is right there in the middle of it. And we ourselves come into it in the middle of the story, and we're shaped by it, and we're molded by it. And here's this picture from my father's church, and there he is behind the pulpit. And I don't know who he got to snap the picture, but I can name some of the people that are sitting in the pews. And, let's see, does this mouse show up? No, I've got it. Right there at the bottom, I can see my 2 sisters sitting in that back row. And my mother, she can't see her, would be right next to them, and I would be in the corner because I would pester my sisters, and we ought not to make that kind of noise in church, so I sat in the corner, isolated by my mother, often through churches, her breathing out threats if I didn't sit still and be quiet. And so I learned, my ADHD young self had to learn to sort of discipline myself. And in the summer times, this was winter, people are wearing coats. In the summer times, the windows would be open and the curtains would fly up, and I'd get to peek outside in the middle of the church service. And Angie Vogel's probably up there on the organ, or maybe Ron Foster is over on the piano, and I see Ari Vental walking in, going to the front, his daughter and his wife. I see Joyce Foster. I see Mrs. Woodenberg. I see others. Many of them are gone too. And that church is not the same church as it was when I was a boy. How could it be? That church might very well go away too. Sheila who has been the minister of it. We'll see what happens. So here we are. But this is the place that so much of who I am is formed by this place. The African Americans, get your bingo card out, baby. Paterson. The shape that my father tried to do something by sort of applying the Dutch Calvinism that he inherited to inner city black America in the midst of heroin going through Paterson and drug rehabilitation and slumlords burning down their apartment buildings and rebuilding the city with Habitat for Humanity. And this is in my bones. It's part of my story. What God does with this and how he uses it in the next dispensation, I do not know, but I think he will. And I think it'll be, I can imagine the possibilities. I regularly talk to my mother, and she has updates of some of the saints of this church that were my parents' age. Billy J, not doing well health-wise. Mrs. M, maybe in her last days. Maybe she'll rally and recover. Mr. M, what if his wife dies? Mrs. H, looked a few years ago like she wouldn't flourish from the stroke. Dougie, who I visited in New Jersey. Sheila, Karen. We're a body together. This is my family. These are my people. I'm not in Paterson, but I'm still connected to them. Dougie and Alicia are, leaders at Cross Point, a church down the road from this. Others are at Madison Avenue, another CRC in Paterson. Others maybe not in CRCs, but we're a family. We're a body. And as long as I'm around, I will be a part of them and they will be a part of me. I owe it much. It has made me who I am. And I'll serve it as faithfully as long as I can, as long as God calls me. God will call me away from it at one point by death or his coming. Could he call me away from it sooner? That's possible. But I'll always be a part of me. Paul Schrader, famous Hollywood director, grew up CRC. It's always a part of him. It's in his movies. You can see it. Hardcore. So, yeah, there are times to change. And so when people leave the CRC, God bless you. I'm not necessarily going to be the judge of whether it's right or wrong. You'll stand before God and answer to it, not me. But God bless you. If you must go, go. Many departures from the CRC have blessed the church. Bill Hybels, again, to say his name. Whether you're against the seeker movement or whether you're against, when some of the revelations that have come by later, God used Bill Hybels mightily, and I think a good way. Were things lost in the seeker movement? Absolutely. But all of these changes, again, I think about Joseph saying to his brothers, you meant it for ill, but God meant it for good. Now, certainly Bill Hybels didn't mean it for ill. The pastor doing the baptism here, a lot of bingo in this video, wearing a frilly woman's bathrobe. Well, they dress in white for baptisms in the streams in the Dominican Republic where the Haitians do their baptisms. And that guy was quite a character. Each church, each little congregation had its little seal, and the seal was round just like the seals that were on the paper, the government papers documents. And so this guy somebody got a whole bunch of blanks of government identity cards, and he kept sealing them with Iglesia Cristiana Reformada de Paraíso. The name of the town was Paraíso, paradise. It was a beautiful town. Not everybody lived there was living in paradise, trust me. I get a call from the military police about, do you have a pastor who's falsifying documents? Probably. Had to go down and take his seal away. He might have spent a night or two in jail, but because, again, and this is sort of some of the ambiguities, because he's a Haitian connected with a North American and the Dominican government, there was a night that a whole bunch of members of our church were taken and brought down to the border to be dumped, because when political winds were bad for the government, blame the Haitians was a fairly common turn. Blame the immigrants, blame the outsiders. Jordan Peterson will talk about those kinds of things. So they rounded up a whole group of people from one of our churches and put them on a truck and sent them to the border, and the pastors come and got me, and we rode to the border in the middle of the night, and I went to the checkpoint and I had a conversation with the military police there, and we don't have your people. We never, of course they see me coming and they think America's Watch or Amnesty International, we could get in trouble, and so lied through his teeth that they didn't have our people. Truth was, when they saw me coming, they put the people on the truck and brought them back, and those people beat us home. We didn't know anything that had happened to these people until the next day or two, and they're all home, safe and sound. Yeah, still illegal, still, But here we are, baptizing in the river, into this tiny little offshoot of a tiny little church, and the doctrinal grasp, the only doctrinal confession we really had in the Christian Reformed Church of the Dominican Republic was the Apostles' Creed. Never would have agreed with the pastors on infant baptism because they didn't believe in it. And when you'd ask a pastor, are we saved by grace or by works? And they'd all say both. And some of them were teetotalers, and women shouldn't wear makeup, and men shouldn't wear shorts, and women should have their heads covered, and in my little part of the world, when they went into the waters of baptism, the spirits didn't want to leave quickly, and so the pastors, they'd thrash in the water, and the pastors would grab them and dunk them again, and just keep dunking them until you drown the demons out of them, and then they're relinquished to the Spirit. Are they not a church? Does God's Spirit not work through them? It's wild. I was in some wild places. And those are probably tame compared to wilder places in the world. But I believe God's Spirit is moving and working through these people. Even Pastor Juan there, making false government documents. You got me telling missionary stories. We should be wary of consumerism. That's a spirit among us. God's church is not a woman to be used. She's already married. She's a mother to be loved and respected. Sometimes we need to change to grow in discipleship and faithfulness. When is it time to end the protest? I think the time is coming. But what will that mean? A colleague of mine, a CRC pastor of mine, said to me once, if the Orthodox and the Roman Catholic ever really, call their feud quits, I might be joining them and become one thing. But what one thing? And someone said, well, we already kind of are because we share, yeah. And that's kind of the point, though, isn't it? What exactly is one thing? Same structure? Same boss? How do you organize? How is it structured? You have sort of the monolithic Roman Catholic. You seem to have these little separate things. Are nations the best way to divide churches? Well, the Christian Reformed Church of North America, well, we're on a continent, but we don't include Mexico or the Dominican Republic. And although the Methodists, it's their all of their African bishops kept them from, agreeing to same-sex marriage. And the church is that way. It's messy. So it's not just up to me. I got to decide for me, and I'm called to account for me and the influence I have over others. But this is a multi-century communal endeavor, and the Protestant Reformation had some points and did some good work. And it was fruitful. I think it was fruitful in the Roman Catholic Church reform. But every Reformation effort is a mixed bag because we're mixed bags. Some things are refreshed, some things are lost, some things are lost and later found. And so I think the protest is coming to an end. I think that's part of this sea change of the end of modernity, because Protestantism and modernity are deeply, deeply tied. What does that mean going forward? Hey, I'm in my 50s. Will I be a Christian Reformed minister when they lay me to rest? I anticipate so. Could it be different? Look at what happened to Paul. He had a Damascus Road experience. So why not orthodoxy for me? Well, I'm still married. No, I'm mixing metaphors there. The CRC are my people. I don't know enough about orthodoxy to pick. And I'm not really shopping right now. You know, you gotta, if you're married, you gotta watch what you're attracted to. Because, our dog died and my wife confessed to me. I was investigating puppies yesterday, and I said, oh, there's no such thing as puppy shopping. Once you go see some puppies, you almost always come home with one. So I got to be a little careful about what I allow myself to be too closely attracted to, because I'm called to be faithful to my people, and I will. And I'll do my best to be as faithful as I can. And have these last 3 years of relationships with really wonderful people like Jonathan Pageau and many others who I've met along the way, have they changed me? Absolutely. My vision of the broader church, of orthodoxy and Roman Catholicism, is far more nuanced and richer than it ever was before. So many of the Roman Catholics I've met, Mary Cohen, what a saint, Gotta love Mary. And Brett and Kale. Gotta do another conversation with those guys. Love these guys. If I was under a roof, worshiping God with them, embracing them as brothers in Christ, absolutely. Something that 70 years ago would have been unthinkable in the Christian Reformed Church. These were papists, subject to the Antichrist, sitting on the throne in Rome. Let's not forget that the Orthodox and the Roman Catholics excommunicated each other. So, and again, part of my goal in Estuary is we're not going to major in those fights, because, in my opinion, there are way more people outside of our collective circle who we should attend to. And so I will let the Orthodox priests attend to their flock, and I'll let the Roman Catholic priests attend to their flock, and I'll let the Bishop of Rome attend to his flock. I must attend to my flock, and outside of all of our circles are many who could use some shepherding. And it is the case, and again, I agree with Lewis, that us bickering about what divides us, I don't think helps those other people out there. Now, I'm not going to play games that there aren't divisions, but I do believe that these divisions can be productive, and I think that Alistair McGrath's book about heresy is really a helpful statement about that. That, a lot of the things that we consider to be orthodoxy, small o, arise from our divisions. God seems extraordinarily patient. 2,000 years is not a long time in God's eyes. So, and our lives are but a blink. We're a breath, the Bible says. So, I like a lot from the Roman Catholics too. I'm just impressed at, what they've done philosophically, what they've done in the world. You read church history. In many ways, my education was impoverished because it was too indoctrinating in some ways. Now, that isn't done as much today as it was when I was coming up, but a deep appreciation for the Roman Church. And, know more about that than I do about the Orthodox, because, of course, we sort of pushed back against the Roman Church in Protestantism. Their size and their endurance is indeed impressive. The way they've managed to be a church among nations is indeed impressive, but They've got plenty of problems of their own, and they'll tell you that. But yet they stay. And you also, for a church, need a local body that fits you, and that makes this whole thing quite a bit more complex. You know, there was a day not too many decades ago that if you were born Christian Reformed, you would move to a town in which there was a Christian Reformed church, and if there wasn't one, the entire denomination would help you start one. That's how this church got started. We were that covenantal, that united. We had that much of a thick identity. And there were some really good things about that, and there were other things about that that weren't so good. But you got to fit in your local body. When I was in Massachusetts, I was talking to a friend of my mother's who died in the wool cradle Catholic, goes to Mass every day. There's a, Catholic church right in her town. Stopped going to Mass in her town and drives a few towns over to go to Mass there. Why? Because of COVID and the priest and the Mass and that other priest. He's really... Now, this kind of thing obviously predates Protestantism, but it's still a very Protestant thing to do and has wisps of consumerism in there. But I wouldn't criticize her for doing that. Guess I'm showing my Protestant stripes. And yeah, the stuff is complex. Do you go to the Orthodox church that is closest to you geographically? Or do you pick the Orthodox church that seems to fit you best? Those are some of the tensions involved. There's what I call the Holy Spirit's dual track. There's apostolic succession. And in many ways, when you say, well, the church in the New Testament is the Orthodox church. I've got a book right here. It says, My Church. Historic Symbols of the Christian Reformed Church. Written by Reverend Richard de Ruyter and Thea B. Van Halsma, a man and a woman, and produced by the Committee on Education of the Christian Reformed Church, the Reverend William Vanderhook, editor, Grand Rapids, Michigan. So it was likely in a church somewhere because someone had their little neckerchief from their either Calvinet or Cadet thing that they penciled in here. I got the book used because these books are hard to find. Copyright 1967. And, well, this is the church. And, well, very quickly, the church in the Old Testament. And then the church in the New Testament. The Holy Spirit and the church. Well, the CRC is the church that we read about in the Bible. And again, for a lot of you, you'd be like, that's just crazy. That's sort of what the CRC believed in the 60s. Now, by the 60s, there's kind of thinking that, well, the CRC participates in that church. Okay. But, and so here's a Psalter hymnal. My father's signature on it. We had these little psalters, and this is, let's see, this is probably one from, you get a pair of glasses. The type's really tiny. Here's mine from when I was a boy. My parents gave it to me for my birthday in 1968. I was 5 years old. I had my own little Psalter hymnal. This one's dated 1934. Now, it's my father was born a little after that, but this is our tradition. And in the back, we have the Catechism and the Belgic Confession and the Canons of Dort, and so there's my father's, there's mine. Basically, the two tracks are sort of apostolic succession. We've noted the Spirit works through structures, and we've talked about quite a bit of that in terms of principalities and powers and the Spirit. And so the Spirit does work through apostolic succession. And if you are discipled by an apostle, you pick up of what that apostle has. But we've been 2,000 years, and we know that there's also corruption. And the second track is sort of the Protestant track, which is Spirit direct. The Spirit also moves through texts and directly, beneath structures, of course, and between them and outside of them. The Spirit does what it wants. God is free. Protestants tend to forefront this aspect of the Spirit's work, while the Roman Catholics and the Orthodox tend to forefront apostolic succession. And of course, that leads to different ideas about the Bible. Sola Scriptura, let the comments flow, is sort of a function of that track. And so when in my church, let's see, I set it down, by De Ruyter and Van Halsema, by virtue of the Holy Spirit, those Haitian pastors, falsifying government documents notwithstanding, do the work of Christ. And the Christian Reformed Church does. And the Orthodox Church does. Now, the argument that, well, the Bible is a function of the church and sola scriptura, that's a big argument, and I've talked about that before, and I think you have to understand both perspectives to understand either correctly. But again, in this estuary, I don't want to make this estuary about the kind of muddy places around an estuary where, we spend a whole lot of time seemingly in intractable fights, because I don't think that does a lot of good to those outside for whom, why are you talking about these things? It gets into what I want from this channel. I'm a Christian. I believe in the Apostles' Creed. I believe that the resurrected Christ is the beginning of creation 2.0. I want to participate in that recreation in increasing measure. But I'm also a Calvinist, so I can't make you a Christian. Only God can. And I don't decide the church. It's Christ's church. It's not mine. I'm its child. I'm not its master. I want you to join me in this because I think it's the best way to live. Now, we seldom get what we want from each other. You make your peace with that after a little while. And I'm not about to play games and manipulate and do any of those things. I'd far rather have a good conversation with you, because actually I think that's leads me towards the ends that I'd like to pursue far better than pressuring or manipulating or threatening or any of those kinds of things. No, we're going to talk, but this is who I am and this is what I want. And so, in a lot of ways, I welcome the influence of the Orthodox Church in America, and I anticipate learning more from them and being corrected and my understanding growing from them. And I feel the same way about the Roman Catholics, and I feel the same way about other Protestant traditions. So but I'm still a Protestant, and I'll likely be until I believe God calls me someplace else. That other someplace might be Abraham's bosom, or it might be another place. Who knows? But I have no intention of leaving. I'm going to serve my church as long and as well as I can. And that's why I'm a Protestant. So thanks for the question. It's a great question. Hopefully this video was a good answer and helpful for many of you trying to figure out how to relate to this thing, this church. I told myself I should remind people. So again, some people have been complaining that YouTube hasn't been bringing up my videos. So if you want to make sure you get them, subscribe, and then there's a little notification bell. If you hit that, you'll get notifications when I post new videos. So or subscribe on a podcast app, and then when you see something on the audio-only podcast, it's not all of the videos, it's most of them. Every now and then I don't put one in audio form, usually a shorter one. Follow me on Twitter. You can find me on Twitter. If you don't like ads, go to Library or Odyssey. That's another way of posting videos that get posted automatically when I post to YouTube. So thanks for watching. Look forward to the comments on this one too. It'll be interesting.